and we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Hello, and welcome to Cows in the Field. This is yet another movie podcast. I'm Justin.
And I'm Laura.
Right, so today we're going to talk about Joyride, 2001. It's a movie directed by John Dahl. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know much else this guy directed. But
Rounders.
Yeah, Rounders. And then I looked him up on IMDb. Basically, he went on to direct a bunch of TV.
Yep.
That's like his thing.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah, so John Dahl, Joyride, starring your favorite guy in the world, Steve Zahn.
I love Steve Zahn.
Paul Walker. So Steve Zahn as Fuller. These guys don't have last names? Fuller.
Yeah, they're the Thomas twins or something. I think she gave a name.
They're labeled
not twins,
just as Fuller
brothers.
and Lewis.
Lily Sobieski gives them a last name at some point.
Right, Lewis, played by Paul Walker, the late Paul Walker. And Lily Sobieski playing someone named Venna. Strange name. Right. So another important fact about this movie, written by J.J. Abrams.
Yep.
Your favorite.
The J-Brums.
The J-Brums. So where do you want to start?
Where do I want to start? You might wonder why we picked this movie of all movies, following up on Departed and Terminator 2. We like this movie a lot. I feel like we've watched it several times. We really enjoy our early 2000s horror film genre. I do in particular. I think this might be more of a Laura's choice than a Justin's choice, which is how we landed on it.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely more of the horror genre person.
Yes, correct.
Do you classify this as a horror movie or as a thriller?
Well, Letterboxd did not classify it as a horror.
Suspense? What is the
suspense and thriller?
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was looking at horror movies in the year, and when I filtered, Joyride was not there for horror movies. So it turns out Letterboxd disagrees with me. I had classified it as horror in my mind because it sort of feels like a piece of all. There's this is maybe like an evergreen genre, but I felt like the late '90s and early aughts there was like a teenagers in trouble horror movie genre. That was particularly strong at that time.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Okay, well, I'd say Scream kicks it off in 1995. And then...
Wait, you mean like this, like a second wave of this? Because certainly
Yes.
Teenager in Trouble has been a trope in horror movies for a
Well,
long
I said
time.
it's evergreen, but it might just be that this was when I was like coming of age and at a time when I was watching horror movies or at least had them in my consciousness because I was scared of them at the time and came back to them later. But yeah, no, I'm thinking about like the wave that kicked off in 1995 with Scream, and there was, I Know What You Did Last Summer and Final Destination, and a lot of those franchises were from the late 90s into the early 2000s. And then really this is on the end of things because the next year, I think, is 2002 Ring, the American one, because J-horror has been percolating in Japan already. And then I think movies start to shift towards like most of the horror movies the next coming years are going to be remakes of Japanese horror movies, which often do involve teenagers in trouble, but they have a different flavor.
Yeah.
These are very American
It's
in my
also
mind.
more supernatural, and this is, I think, I actually want to argue there is a supernatural element to this movie, but we can get into that.
Okay.
But yeah, great. So, do you remember when the first time you saw this movie? Like, would you remember why this
No.
movie is important to you?
No.
I think I know when I first saw it.
Okay.
I think I first saw this movie so this movie came out in 2001, and I would have been a senior in high school, or no, yeah, I would have been a senior, right? Because I graduated in 2002, and it came out in October 2001. So I believe I saw this movie for the first time. It's possible I saw it in theaters, but it's actually more likely that I saw it for the first time at a friend's house. And so I think I remember just like sitting on a couch, watching this movie, quite like enjoying it. Like it's an enjoyable movie, and then
Just some follow-up questions to set the scene. Was it a sleepover?
No.
Were there boys and girls?
Probably.
That's fun.
Yeah, I'm sure there was. Yeah, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was fun. It's like a fun movie, and it's a movie that stuck with me. And rewatching it now, it's interesting because it's so of a time. Like it's so it is 2001, but it really feels like it's the vestiges of the 90s. And that's one thing that's a big sort of theme that I want to get into is the 90s and what was going on in the 90s, the cultural context in which this movie comes out of. And I think what is going on in the movie, why it like tapped into something I think very palpable at that time. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting to revisit now because it's like the issues we were facing then are just so different from the ones that we face now, like 20 years later, basically. And so it's kind of, it's like going in a time machine to in a way, like, a more innocent time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even though it is dated, I think it's really nicely rewatchable because it's, everything revolves around a really analog thing, CB radio, which was kind of considered old school at the, they make jokes about it being like prehistoric internet in the movie. And, so there's not any cell phones that look really funky. That often gets in the way of like early 2000 movies when you go back and look at the technology. And there's no crappy special effects. It's just like a straightforward thriller. So I think that's partly why it's so rewatchable.
So shall we take a time machine back to the 1990s? Because
Please.
I think it is relevant to understanding what is going on in this movie to sort of know where we are in the 90s. And just really for all of us who might be listening who are like, oh yeah, the 90s, what was that like? Well, let me tell you. The period between 1990 and really when this movie came out, which is 2001, it's a pretty serene period, all things considered, and especially in light of everything that's been happening in recent history. The Cold War has ended. It's apparently the longest stretch of peacetime expansion for the U.S. Since starting in 1991. There are really no wars happening, at least U.S. wars happening, between the Gulf War and the Iraq War. The Iraq War is 2003. So I think really it's a period of prosperity. But then what comes with prosperity? Boredom, contentment, navel gazing, I think, to a certain extent. And that's, I think, borne out in the movies of the 90s. And you get a lot like Forrest Gump. You get Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List. These are movies that are looking backwards to a time when there was conflict. And, now we can kind of look back at like, the history ended, right? We're in this glorious time where we have the luxury to just like reflect on the crazy past. But then of course it's also a time that comes with a lot of boredom, right? We've reached a kind of pinnacle of civilization, so to speak, and in terms of economic prosperity and everything, low unemployment, everyone's doing well. The middle class is thriving, and then you get a movie that wins Best Picture in 1999 with beating out some really good movies. You get American Beauty, which wins Best Picture in 1999. No comment on American Beauty as far as a movie. I mean, I'm fine on American Beauty, but I think it really, in a way, it's a capstone movie for that decade because it's a movie that's just about the malaise of the middle class, like about just feeling like you have no meaning in your life because your life is so unbearably boring. But that's because every need is met. Every need you could possibly have has been met. And you're just like, what else is there to life, right? And I think that really sums up the 90s in a certain respect. The other thing that you get in the 90s, which I really want to talk about more, is that's the time when Gen X sort of moves into the workforce. And I think that is a central theme of this movie is both the culture that arises out of the 90s, including this culture of sort of boredom and malaise, and then also the rise of Gen X and the conflict between the Gen Xers and the baby boomers who are still holding the power, so to speak, while the Gen Xers are kind of up and coming. But anyway, this isn't a political podcast. This is a podcast about Joyride.
Joyride.
A movie about getting in the car and going on a joyride. So what happens in this movie? Paul Walker, he's got a crush on a girl, Lily Sobieski. She goes to the University of Colorado Boulder. He goes to the University of California, Berkeley. Fancy guy, getting into UC Berkeley. But he likes Lily, and he's about to fly home. I don't know where he's going home.
New Jersey.
He's about to fly to New Jersey, and he's been chatting with her. She's in her underwear. He's got his roommate. He just gives him the CD player. He's like, it's 3 a.m., man. if it's 3 a.m. where he is, it's like 5 a.m. where she is.
Yeah. She does ask if she's keeping him up. He says no.
Yeah, well, I think they might have got their time zones crossed. And she's like, well, you know, what does she say? Like, I don't know. I'm like, how am I going to get home or something? I don't know. How does this start?
She wants to decompress. She doesn't want to go home right away.
Okay,
She wants to go home slow.
Let me flag that.
Okay.
Because taking it easy and decompressing, a bit of a calling card for Gen X.
Okay.
I just said that now several times, but you know,
Okay.
I've been doing a little bit of research on
Noted.
Gen X, not my
Underlined.
generation, but taking it easy, taking, you know, traveling and seeing the world rather than building your career, kind of one of the, you know, prototypical Gen X features.
Okay.
Okay. So she wants to chill out, see the U.S. a little bit, maybe go on a little road trip. Paul Walker's like, I got a car. No car. Does not own a car.
Lies.
He has a MasterCard though, so he could. Maybe he's just gonna buy a car. Mm-hmm.
He buys a used car.
Well,
you know, let's not get crazy. He doesn't buy a Porsche, but yeah, he buys a pretty cool 1970s, I think.
Yeah, 71. That's an important year.
Oh, okay. Great. 1971 car.
Don't forget that date.
pretty sexy.
1971.
And he's going to go pick her up. But first, he's got to pick up his deadbeat brother, who's in jail again in Utah.
Yep.
He's going to bail him out and then take his brother to Colorado. And then the original plan is to dump him and then get the girl.
Yep.
But Steve Zahn has other plans.
Zahn is the brother.
Yep.
I mean, he's not a deadbeat, but he's a bit of a goofball. And so, yeah, they're on their way to go pick up Lily Lily, Venna. And they decide to pull a prank.
Right.
Yeah. Prank using the CB radio, which they just install in their car because they have money. And somehow Zahn knows a bunch of CB codes.
Yep.
Right. He's just like Mama Bear, Papa Bear. He knows how to do it. And a certain guy is calling out to hear what's up. Rusty Nail. Rusty Nail wants to know who's on the road and everything. And what is it? Zahn says you got to pretend you're a girl.
Right. And Paul Walker does a pretty good girl.
Yeah, well, the thing is, as I pointed out before to you, not on mic, that Paul Walker, he sort of looks like a girl.
He's
I mean, he
beautiful.
has the like very feminine features.
Yep.
So watching Paul Walker, you're like, he kind of could just be a girl, right? Like, you know, he could just do he could just bend the gender and just go for it all the way. So he pretends to be a girl. They string along Rusty Nail. Things go south. It's not a good idea to try to set up for humiliation a trucker who's lonely. He's not having a good time. He's out on the road, long hours.
Yep. Are we going to go over the whole plot?
No, I just wanted to. That's the central.
That's the
There's
set.
things I need to get to in my discussion.
No, I know
that
you've got 4
involve
pages
that
of
plot.
notes, so I'm just checking. I was just looking at you like, is this what we're doing?
No, but I just wanted to make sure that not everyone who's listening may have watched the movie, and so they set him up. He kind of gets humiliated. He thinks he's going to go meet a certain person named Candy Cane. That's the girl Paul Walker's pretending to be. And it's really just some guy at a motel that they thought was a jerk. And and then why don't you tell us what happens to the guy in the motel room?
He gets jaw removed.
Yeah.
Rusty Nail grabs him. I don't know where he kills.
Well, we don't see it happen.
We don't see it happen, but we find out that this other man has been found, on a highway median, discarded. He's alive, I think, but he is missing. He's in a coma and he's missing his jaw.
Yep.
His lower jaw.
So he's got no jaw, but he's otherwise okay. Yeah.
So don't fuck with Rusty Nail.
Don't mess with Rusty Nail.
Is what we're finding out.
Yep.
And they will find out for the rest of the movie because Rusty Nail now has a vendetta against these brothers.
Yeah, and Rusty Nail may be a little bit underwritten in the following sense. He seems to want an apology. He gets his apology. And then once they pick up Lily, he seems to want more. Mm-hmm. Namely, he wants to humiliate them and maybe capture and torture Lily and have, it's unclear sort of what Rusty Nail wants, but he's a bad guy in a silly horror movie. So what more can we want?
Yep.
Yeah.
I wouldn't overthink it.
Well,
is that what we're about to do?
I think that's kind of the point of this podcast.
Okay,
is to
great.
Overthink stupid
Let's get
movies.
into it. One of the things I think that feels particularly time-stamped about this movie is the cast. Paul Walker, Steve Zahn, and Lily Sobieski being the three leads. And really, it's kind of almost a chamber piece. It's just them. There's a couple of other characters that come in and out, and you never really see Rusty Nail. Although it is, Rusty Nail is voiced by Ted Levine, although uncredited, right? Which is kind of bananas. But this movie kind of comes at the peak, I'd say, for all three of these actors, or at least for Paul Walker's career then becomes defined by Fast and Furious. But Paul Walker just started popping up. He's in 1999, he's in She's All That, and he's in Varsity Blues. In 2000, he's in The Skulls. And in 2001, he's got Joyride and Fast and Furious. Fast and Furious came out that June in 2001. And in this movie, in 2001, he's 28. And then from there on, his career is a lot of Fast and Furious movies. The next one is in 2003, Too Fast, Too Furious. Steve Zahn, meanwhile, he popped a little bit earlier. He's older. He was in Reality Bites. Speaking of Gen X, he was in Reality Bites in 1994. In 95, he's got like a role on Friends, and he's in Crimson Tide. And then 96, he's in That Thing You Do, which is like my connection with him. I rewatched That Thing You Do. I don't even know how many times as a kid. And he's such a goofy character. I loved him in that movie. And then he kind of has like a thing where he's just like the like funny friend in rom-coms. He's in You've Got Mail in 98. He's in Forces of Nature in 99. And then 2001, he's got both Joyride and Saving Silverman, where he's paired up with Jack Black as the two sort of goofy friends that are trying to save Silverman.
Yeah, I like that one.
And then I think
I remember
yeah. And then after that, he's kind of like the funny guy. Like he's in Daddy Daycare after that. I think they just decided to let Steve Zahn be like a goofball and not try to have him be like a romantic lead or any serious character ever again. Because I think he's a little bit miscast in this movie.
Yeah. So do you want to say what you had in mind by that? I mean, because I agree that I think he's kind of the instigator and almost like a second villain in a weird way in this movie. And it's just casting someone that goofy.
Yeah. So I thought a little bit about whether or not it would be better to have Paul Walker and Steve Zahn be flipped in their roles in this movie, mostly because Paul Walker actually had been kind of a baddie in a lot of these movies. I actually haven't seen Varsity Blues, so I don't know what his character was, but in She's All That, he's the bad guy. He's the guy that convinces Freddie Prinze Jr. to have a bet, and then I think he may like sexually harass, like he's not I remember him being like real deliciously bad in She's All That, like full steam ahead bad. And same with The Skulls. There's two characters, him and Joshua Jackson's character, and he's the one who's kind of like the rich, evil cabal guy who's like deep in already with The Skulls. And then, I think he's a good guy in all the Fast and Furiouses. But my point is just being that he's really good looking, he's really slick, and he can pull off kind of a bad guy with a charming veneer. Like he's so beautiful, like you almost need to like be suspicious of him. And I think he does that well. So I think he could have been kind of the bad boy brother who's the instigator of the prank. I think he could have pulled that off really well. Whether or not Steve Zahn would be a good foil to that, I'm not sure. But I think it's Steve Zahn's so silly. It's hard to imagine him when he sort of spouts off his philosophy about like, who cares? You're going to be dead in 100 years anyway. Like, I don't take responsibility for anybody. It's hard to buy coming from silly Steve Zahn, where like my favorite line that he says in You've Got Mail is when he says he needs to buy some eucalyptus candles because they make his apartment smell mussy. Okay. Like he's like a goofball.
He's a goofy guy.
So it's a little bit hard to buy.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. So these two guys are both playing younger in this movie, but
I mentioned Steve Zahn's 34 in this movie.
I mean they're both firmly Gen Xers. Mm-hmm. And that is the thing that I think to me unlocks this movie, because I think it elevates it in a way beyond just being, a fun kind of schlocky horror movie, which is that I think it's a movie about generational conflict. It's a movie about the conflict in particular between the rising power of the Gen X generation and the sort of declining power of the baby boomer generation. And so to set this up, I mean, obviously the characters in the movie are Gen Xers. They're played by Gen Xers and so on. Rusty Nail is clearly a boomer, right? He presumably, I would even guess he's a Vietnam vet, right? He reads so much, like, I mean, he's got all these like murderous tendencies and right. I mean, and so, you know, he's got all that going on. And so I think thinking of the movie through that lens of this kind of generational conflict was what opened it up for me. And one of the things that when you really start to think through what like is the difference between the Gen X and the boomer generation, a couple things jump out. And I wasn't totally sure myself. And then I was doing a little bit of research to figure out like, well, what characterizes the boomers versus the Gen X generation? And I think at the end of the day, the main difference is that, you know, the boomers came of age at a time when there was deep distrust of the government, this like potential for, you know, different forms of government, right? That people were communists and whatever, and they were sort of duking it out. There was protest against the war. People stood for something. And then that segued into the excesses of the 70s and the 80s, right? Which really just like destroy the country as far as I'm concerned, as far as like I think history sees, right? You have all these excesses of things like drug addiction, AIDS, environmental damage, unregulated expansion of capitalism, defunding of the social safety net, all these things. And then the next generation coming up is then the Gen Xers. And the Gen Xers, they come into this and they see all these things that the boomers, you know, said they stood by, but then it didn't really stand by, right? They all just like got white collar jobs and destroyed the government and destroyed the environment and stuff. They didn't really stand for the things that they said they stood for as hippies, right? And I think the Gen Xers were just cynical and they just detached from that. They're just like, ah, fuck it. I'm going to tune out and listen to MTV and just like, that's it, right? And so that's why they were called the slacker generation, right? I mean, that was like the Linklater movie that sort of characterized them. But I think it's also important to note that, of course, the Gen Xers had the prosperity to be able to make those choices, to be able to be like, whereas the boomers were like, we got to work really hard and it's all about getting ahead and like fighting for, you know, working 60-hour work weeks and stuff. The Gen Xers were like, my dad's never home, right? Was that worth it? Like to have an absentee father? I want to have a family life, right? I don't want to work 60 hours a week. I want to just like chill out. I want to see the world. I want to have my own life. But of course, they also had the economic prosperity to make those choices. Why? Because their parents were rich, right? Because their parents had that economic prosperity from working hard and being in the right position and being buoyed by the previous generation and so on. So I think this, of course, it's going to lead to a great amount of friction, right, between these generations. You've got these hard worker generation, baby boomer, who like feel like they're entitled to everything because they, you know, and granted they, you know, they were like they were a fantastic generation. They created a lot of interesting, important culture, and they, you know, whatever. And then you got the Gen Xers who are just like, yeah, whatever. I mean, of course, there's going to be a huge conflict there. And in this movie, the conflict comes down to the point of, I think, prank culture, which is this thing that arises in the 90s, I think in its you know, or at least becomes mainstream in the 90s, and is a direct distillation of the Gen X mentality. And so I'm thinking in particular in pop culture of shows like Crank Yankers, which is the one where like they would like call up.
Is that the one with puppets?
Yeah, there would be like puppets and stuff. Yeah, Crank Yankers. This a lot of this is late 90s, early 2000s, but this is the time, this is where we are.
Yep.
Tom Green show, where Tom Green would always be like going into like various stores and pranking people and stuff. Jackass, the Ashton Kutcher one, Punked, although that does come a little bit later than this, but you know, it's all of a piece. And in particular also skate culture, right? Which really embodies this idea of like, yeah, so you boomers like built all these like office parks, but we're gonna like skateboard in them.
Yeah.
And, like,
did BAM prank and skate?
Yeah, that's the idea. Is that it's all together. And you know, I have to admit that I was part of a group of friends who, you know, who were very active in the sort of pranking scene in Denver. We like to go around and, of course, we were a bunch of suburban white kids, right? We weren't worried we were going to go to jail or something, right? We had no consequences to what we were doing.
Right.
And that, I think, is the real idea of the Gen X, what's going on in culture at this time, is that there's like, what's going on in this movie? It's like, we're just going to prank this guy. And who really cares? Like, it's fine. Like, can't you take a laugh, right? Like, who cares, right? Mm-hmm. But the guy they prank is a boomer, and he's a serious guy. He's a lonely.
That's the thing. Don't prank boomers.
They can't take a joke. I mean, that's the thing. They're serious people. They do not want, young kids getting in the way of them and their work. And I understand that. That's a very mature perspective. Okay, but that's, I think, the central conflict of this movie is it's distilled through the generational conflict. The prank is the example of that, and what it is it's this fight over what is the right value system? Is it like hard work, or is it work-life balance? Is it success, or is it having the time and freedom to do what you want? Is it long hours and showing a dedication and loyalty to a job, or is it being pragmatic about the work, right? Like getting done what you need to do and then going home, right? So I think like that, it's really this conflict between these two things. And if you think about it, Rusty Nail, he's this guy, he's a career trucker, right? He's like a serious guy. He's like, this is my career. This is what I do. And like these kids are coming in on the CB. They're messing around. They're being jerks.
Don't mess in the CB.
Yeah, like just let me live my life as a trucker. Like, why do you have to come in here and do this? And that's what it feels like to me. Because that's what we were doing as kids, right? As teenagers, is like we'd go to like some office park and like go into the office and just be stupid. And, these people just want to do their jobs, right? And like we're coming in and being jerks and stuff because we think it's funny. But, so what I'm trying to say is I think Rusty Nail is the hero of the movie. No.
Well, no, I do think there is a weird tension, though. I mean, the movie turns and then like basically the halfway mark when they get Lily Sobieski, you think, it's not going to be over because the movie's only halfway through. But it seems as if like what happens is there's a great action scene in which they almost get run over by Rusty Nail's truck, and he demands an apology, and they finally do it, and then he backs off, and he's just like, "Oh, I was kidding too," and drives away. And they're like, "I guess okay, like we've solved the problem," but then it turns out Rusty Nail is a freaking psychopath, murderous killer, and likes to talk about taking people's fingers and jaws off. So. Then as you said, like it sort of gets unclear whether or not he wants his apology or wants to humiliate them or wants to dissect them. But you might think in the first half of the movie, like you do have some empathy for Rusty Nail.
Yeah, he's a lonely guy. And these guys are, the boys are twerps. They are. And they're privileged, they're privileged jerks, basically.
Totally.
I mean, they have money. They have and at one point they're kind of harassed at a bar, and the guy calls them a college boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this blue collar, white collar conflict as well. That's kind of bubbling under the surface.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting. So I think what you were alluding to when you thought I had a little speech to make about 90s horror movies, but I was thinking about movies in which like pranks have gone bad or in which teenagers have done something careless or reckless or pranked somebody and they're getting their comeuppance in like the context of a horror movie. I know you did last summer. It was a hit and run. I thought it was a prank gone wrong, but it was a hit and run. They run over somebody and I think try and cover it up, and then somebody saw it and they know what you did last summer and they're getting picked off and murdered.
I see. Okay.
Or
I don't think I've seen that movie.
I was actually looking at Lily Sobieski's career, and she, in the year 2000, she was in a movie called Here on Earth, and the description is a rich college kid is taught a lesson after taking a joyride that ends up destroying a country restaurant. So I think there is kind of a little mini genre of movies in which teenagers kind of get theirs from being careless or thoughtless or pranking, which is. It's weird because I think those movies are for the teenagers, and yet there's like almost like this boomer retribution that's happening through the movie. Like we're watching them learn their lesson the hard way.
Exactly. So who's acting in the movies? Gen Xers. Who are producing the movies? Baby boomers, right?
Yeah.
Like so.
The director of this movie, by the way, was born the same year as my dad.
Yeah, exactly. So totally. Like this is a movie with Like,
but it's written by Gen Xer. It's written by J.J.
Gen
Abrams.
Xer. Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna get to this.
Yeah.
We're gonna get to the J. Abrams thing. Yeah, no, for
the
sure.
J. Abrams of it all.
No, yeah. But that's what I think is so interesting is I think
Yeah.
this movie is a distillation of a class of both a class but also a generational conflict,
Mm-hmm.
and it is like this like, you know, baby boomer fantasy of like, yeah, these fucking kids, like, just like, wouldn't it be great if like Ted Levine just like decided to like rip their jaws off?
Right. Yeah. Because he hurt that guy's feelings real bad.
Well, also because they don't embody the right values, right? They're like slackers. Like, they don't know what it's like to fight in a war. They don't know what it's like to, you know, protest, you know, the government and stand for something, a true ideology, to like fight for change, to be at like a Woodstock and like, you know, change culture. They're just like, you know, benefiting from the fruits of our labor. Like, that's the idea, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's, I don't know. I find that's such a more interesting thing than just, Rusty Nail's a psychopath.
Right. But it is interesting because, you know who's not watching those movies, this Joyride? My dad, like boomers. But it's for Gen Xers. It's for millennials.
I don't actually know if that's true. I mean, I think our parents would have watched this movie when it came out. I think my dad might have watched this movie when it came out. I think it was for everyone. I think that's part of what is appealing about it. Is that it hits it looks like it's ostensibly for kids and for teens to like hold each other's hands in the theater and all that sort of thing, but it's secretly a boomer revenge story. And that, I think, victory for everyone, right? That's hitting all the pieces of the pie.
Right. Well, there's always been these theories about, and they talk a lot about it in the movie Scream too, about like horror movies actually being quite conservative and their like moral values. Yeah. You know, if you have sex, then you die.
Yep.
You know, and if you prank people, you die.
Yeah. One more thing about Rusty Nail as well, two more things actually about him being basically a prototypical baby boomer. He's definitely a hard worker. He's if he has kids, which let's hope he doesn't. He's a very absentee father, right? He's on the road for long stretches of time, you know, out, and he's not around, right? And secondly, you get this generational difference in the music, right? So the soundtrack is all like kind of grunge, right? Late 90s stuff, like alt rock.
Old 97s.
Well, yeah, exactly. And then the music that when Rusty Nail captures you, he puts on 60s pop music.
Yep.
Right? So Rusty Nail, you know, he's got that like old vibe going. He's got the, you know, he wants to bring it back to the 60s. And you know, could imagine
back when
that
you could just abduct any lady you like.
Yeah, you know what? The good old days. And, you know, whereas I'm sure Rusty Nail he'd be the first to complain about the soundtrack of this movie.
He doesn't like old 97s?
Whatever.
Come on.
Stuff. Okay, real quick, J. Abrams.
To J. Abrams.
'Cause I think this is relevant to this very point. So J.J. Abrams is the director / writer who is the most indebted and in love with Steven Spielberg. He's definitely, I mean, maybe if he's not the most, he's the most Gen X director. He's most in love with Spielberg. And you could think of his entire career as basically one giant homage to Spielberg. And this movie is, I think, one massive homage to Spielberg. In fact, so much so, let's just go through it real quick. So the date of the car, the year of the car, 1971, is the year of the Steven Spielberg movie Duel, which is a movie about a deranged truck driver running down a poor a guy in a car, basically, and harassing him. And then, and you never see the truck driver's face, et cetera, et cetera. It's basically this movie. Steven Spielberg's first movie came out in 1971. Second point. Now, you weren't as into this one, but
I don't buy this one. Sorry, folks.
So Rusty Nail decides his mode of killing is rip people's jaws off. Right? Jaws, 1975 Steven Spielberg movie. I think compelling. Another third argument. Crucial scene in this movie, cornfield chase. Also E.T., very important scene in E.T., 1982 Steven Spielberg movie, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Go ahead.
Counterpoint. Cornfields are like staples of horror movies and you know, horror October feelings generally. They're always in, you know, whenever you go to a haunted house, they got cornfields,
all right, yeah,
corn mazes. Sure. Although this movie takes place in May, so.
Tricksky. One last argument.
Yep.
All right, this might be even the most sort of reaching, but
okay.
Spielberg, both Abrams and Spielberg are people who wanted to look back and venerate the generation prior. So think about Spielberg venerating the silent generation with his movies such as Raiders of the Lost Ark, which takes place basically around World War II, Empire of the Sun, World War II movie, Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List, and so on. He's obsessed with that genre, right? And then you've got Abrams obsessed, perhaps equally, with the baby boomer generation, and in particular with Spielberg's work. But I mean, in a way, Abrams is more interested in this in a metatextual way, because he wants to venerate the sort of the film heroes that came out of that generation. Of course, among them Spielberg, but Abrams has also done, he's done the Lucas thing, he's done Star Wars, he's done Star Trek, he's done Mission Impossible, right? These are all sort of stalwart, things from his childhood and so on that were created by that previous generation, and he himself is very much sort of looking back just as much as Spielberg himself was looking back to the prior generation.
Yeah.
And I think this relates to the generational shift, but it also relates to a shift in cultural values in the US, and how you can read this movie, I think, as in a way a violent sort of reaction by a conservative culture against, basically anticipating what we experience now in Donald Trump, is this violent reaction to feeling like the culture has ceased to be the mainstream of American culture and society. That conservative values have fallen from their cultural prominence and so on. White men have not occupying or felt to occupy as privileged a space as they once were, once did. And I think the clearest place where you see this is in the portrayal of trucker culture throughout American history. So I didn't know about this, but I was looking it up, and I found it so fascinating that so in the early days of the trucking industry, truckers were really portrayed consistently throughout popular culture as the protagonists, right? Like, because there was a real veneration of these men, right? Because the thought was like, well, these guys are really sacrificing their time with their family and stuff to be on the road, going these long haul trips and things, and they were apparently considered the knights of the road. And they would help. They would be thought to just help stranded travelers. So if your car broke down, like, you could count on a trucker to help, pull over and help you out. Apparently, so there's a chart-topping trucker hit released in 1963 by the country singer Dave Dudley called 6 Days on the Road.
Well, I pulled out of Pittsburgh, rolling down that eastern seaboard. I got my diesel wound up and she's a-running like I never before. There's a speed zone ahead with all
really is like a big part of this culture. But then starting around the 80s, and then, slowly...
I guess Spielberg kicked it off in 71.
Well, there were here and there, but then starting in the 80s, that image slowly starts to dissipate, right? It slowly changes into where the truckers begin to be portrayed as the antagonists, psychotic, evil, hillbilly kind of, right? This thought that they're these real negative stereotypes surrounding the trucker.
Right. Yeah. And there's real middle America feel to this movie, and that there's something sinister about the middle America blue
Hills
collar.
Have Eyes kind of thing, right? Like this idea that like if you get on the wrong, you end up, or like Texas Chainsaw, right? This like fear of the like Wild West of the open expanse of the American,
right? And they're going from they're
system.
they're going from one coast to the other coast, with the brief
straight
stop
through
in
a college
Denver,
town.
right? Straight through a college town, right? They're going from Berkeley to New Jersey, and they're like, ooh, Wyoming and Nebraska, yeesh. These people are weird.
Now, it could be, I don't know what the answer to this is. It could be that this changed for, whatever broader reasons and culture is changing. But it could also be that this changed because, and you're going to love this.
Okay.
So,
am I?
You might know about this guy because you're a bit of a murderino. So Keith Hunter Jesperson, apparently, is a Canadian-American serial killer.
Okay.
Who murdered at least 8 women in the U.S. during the early 90s.
Was he a trucker?
Yep. He was known as the happy face killer
Stop.
because he drew smiley faces on various letters that he sent to media and prosecutors.
Oh,
so he
my
was
God.
a trucker, a long haul trucker who would just pick up prostitutes and kill them. And this idea that there were a higher preponderance of serial killers among the trucker population sort of gained traction when apparently in 2009, the FBI released the results of a 5-year-long study investigating unsolved murders of prostitutes. Mm-hmm. And they found they had 500 female victims compiled in a database, mostly killed or discarded at truck stops, hotels, and roadsides. And the FBI suspects that many were murdered by long-haul truck drivers, some of whom may be serial killers.
Yeah, well, they're loners. They're itinerant. That makes sense. Fits the profile.
Yeah, and I mean also using drugs. Apparently, it's a lot of drug use among truck drivers, and I think so these are all negative things and everything, but this is all part of the cultural package and beliefs about truckers. But I also looked up the trucker code, and the trucker code, like the code of honor, it is something where you get a real sense of the sacrifice that I think these men make, in the service of bringing us the goods that we want to buy on Amazon all the time or whatever,
Yeah, thank God for those truckers now.
Yeah.
I'm not leaving my house.
Exactly. And it is a sacrifice because it's not like, you go to work and you come home at the end of the day. It's like you go to work and then you're gone for weeks at a time, right? Away from your family. It's quite lonely. I think that is, I can see, how there's two sides to this. On the one hand, it's like, we should venerate these guys. I mean, these are hardworking dudes who are out there doing an essential service for us. I mean, at least until robots are doing that job. But then on the other hand, I think we are justifiably think that they're a little bit strange because, why would you want to get in a truck and just be away and alone for long periods of time? We must think there's something weird about you, that you just want to sit in a truck and it's like, it's a dangerous job. And these are long hours. And so it is, there's two sides of this, but I think it is kind of interesting that culturally, we sort of went through both of them. And then, of course, this movie is coming at a time when, as you pointed out, there's like every other horror movie was like crazy truck driver.
This year Jeepers Creepers came out, which is another road trip movie with the brother and sister, but also involves a murderous truck driver, or possibly they see a truck driver like pulling a body bag behind a building. It came out the exact same year.
Yeah.
It's in the air.
It's in the air. Yeah. Well, it's, I think it's a fun movie, and it's a movie that, it's 20 years old, but it's still quite fun. I mean, it's pretty contrived, but I like that, they managed to keep the suspense going. And I think that's one of the things J. Abrams is good at. And he basically uses lots of tricks. I mean, that's the thing that Abrams is good at, is he knows all these tricks and he throws them in there, right? The double fake out that he does with the ice truck and everything. It's just, it's good writing. It's good, he knows it's there's a pedigree to what J. Abrams is doing, right? It's Spielberg via Hitchcock and right. And
no, I like a lot of things, but I was thinking about why, because there's plenty of late 90s horror movies just to stick on, and why do we watch Joyride more than once and considered purchasing it last? No, we did buy it last night. We bought it. Yep. I think there's a lot of good tension that is quite simple. Just being in a dead end road and having a truck come at you.
Yep.
You are right that then J.J. Abrams does a good job of it. First, the ice truck comes at you, and you think that he's going to be the killer, then you get a sigh of relief, and then turns out no, the real killer is still coming for you, so you get a kind of bait and switch. But that's just a really simple device, just being alone and seeing a car come at you and having the tensions coming from the bright lights, and it's really simple. I think Paul Walker has a really natural charisma. I like watching him on screen. I think he does a really good job. He plays things really subtly. I thought his performance was really good. The best of the three of them.
Yeah, Paul Walker. Real quickly on Paul Walker.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's sad because Paul Walker could have had, he had a huge amount of his career still open, and he very easily could have been, transitioned to a more, to a Heath Ledger type thing where he did more serious and more interesting stuff, and he might have had it in him to do that, and that would have been really great. And but at the very least, he was a good looking guy who knew how to be magnetic on screen.
I thought he was.
The world is worse without him.
I know. More things that I like about this movie. I like that it's a road trip movie combined with a horror movie. I like that it feels really American. And I like that he turns something really banal into something really horrifying and nerve-wracking. Trucks, we see them all the time. We don't think about them on the road. We don't think twice about them. They're just like visual noise. And once this movie gets going, you're looking at every truck on the screen. You realize that they're everywhere, and you don't know which one Rusty Nail could be in. He could be anywhere in a 5-mile radius if that's the the CB radio radius. And it makes something so simple tense all the time. I think it's smart. I also just like the time capsule-ness of it. Yeah. I wrote down things that are so 2001. Paul Walker's jeans.
The jeans were
no cell phones. This movie would be over with it. Just like so many movies at that time.
They did have cell phones at the time.
They did, but
they pointedly did not have them in the script.
Right. I think you might choose not to have a cell phone.
I think
at
actually
that time
this
still.
movie. Apparently, I read that Dahl. It took him 4 years to get it made, which means this movie probably was written like 4 or 5 years before.
That makes sense to me. That makes sense. Yeah. Just all of the clothes. I wrote layered tank tops with no bra.
Yeah. Well,
that's a moment.
Is that a thing?
It's a thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, especially the wearing more than one tank top. It was sort of like a little bit before the wearing the two polos, but you got to wear like multiple tank tops with different colors. Yeah, okay. But a bra is up to your own discretion. And then maps, as you pointed out, just so many maps. Yeah. I love it. This is the time of MapQuest too, but it's you probably wouldn't. They're making choices on the road. They can't go back to their desktop and print out.
Did you ever have that big map book?
Oh, yeah. Maps Go? Yeah.
The thing that was like a metro area.
My sister tore out the critical page that had our neighborhood in it. I don't know. I don't know why she ripped it out.
She figured you already knew where you were when you got to that page, so why did you need it?
Yeah, no, it was pretty annoying.
What else 90s wise was
the soundtrack, old 97s.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I would have preferred a little bit more rap rock.
You wanted more rap rock? Like you wanted some Korn in there?
Yeah, or some Linkin Park, or who else would have been big at that time? Kid Rock.
Wow. Would they have been listening to Kid Rock though? Like maybe Steve Zahn's character.
Oh, you know what? You're right, because they're college
they're college
kids. They're like Richies. They're not gonna. Yeah. Kid Rock wasn't.
They're gonna be like listen to Dave Matthews.
Yeah, they. Crash into me. All right, so yeah, that's happening.
But I was thinking about, just to go back to the question of flipping the roles for Paul Walker and Steve Zahn, or I was thinking about how I might want to make this movie better, because you mentioned to me.
Oh yeah, okay. So who you recast?
I wouldn't recast it. I think I would just tweak Paul Walker's character a little bit to make him less of a hero. It would be a different movie, and they probably wouldn't make it. But I was thinking about, he's such a total goodie in this movie, except for that he goes along with this prank, and in fact it is his voice that is Candy Cane, but he's kind of coerced he's kind of like bullied into doing it by his brother. But it didn't take a lot. It just took like a couple arm punches and like a come on, and then he does it. And I was thinking about toxic masculinity. I was thinking about guys who wear their like goodness on their sleeve like armor, and then feel that because they are good guys, because they pronounce themselves as good guys, they deserve the women that they want, or they deserve whatever they want. I was thinking about how well like the character of Paul Walker, you know, maybe he goes on to become like a banker who does shady shit because like because everybody else does, because it's in the culture, because your boss does it. He seems like he's kind of weak, you know, he's not that firm in the morals that he espouses. And they could have leaned into that a little bit more. Like if they had him, you know, reticent to do the prank, but then once he gets into the prank, maybe it's his idea to have Rusty Nail meet them at the motel. Because in the beginning, they're just playing with him by like getting him to say embarrassing stuff like, I'd take off your bra. It's Steve Zahn's idea to have them. It's the brother's idea to have them actually like meet up at a motel. But I think it would have been more interesting if it's in fact Paul Walker who suggests it. If Paul Walker, like you find out that like he's just the same in terms of not really giving a shit about other people. Yeah. If you give him a little push, if he gets in the right contacts, if he gets around the right people. But you know, instead they have him be more of a goody two shoes, who just kind of and he's, you know, guilty about it afterwards. And, that's the scene in which he feels really bad about it. And Steve Zahn's like, who gives a shit? Like, this isn't our fault. You know, I always just think we're all gonna be dead in 100 years.
I totally agree with you. As usual, we don't disagree about anything on this podcast, but I will say, I think
we can start working on that if you want.
We need to start disagreeing more. Anyway, but I do think that because it's a mainstream movie, they need to have that character that the audience can identify with, that sort of audience surrogate character. And if that guy is too complicated, the audience can check out. And so I agree, it would have been a much better movie, but it might not have made it past the
but Paul Walker would have been really good at it, because we've seen him be a baddie before. Right. And I was thinking about that scene where he gets pulled over for speeding in the very beginning, because he's going to go pick up his brother. And he's like, oh, I'm going to go see my brother. I'm going to pick him up from jail. I haven't seen him in 5 years. So this is kind of a good deed scenario. He's kind of talking himself out of the ticket. He's smooth. And, you know, if they had played with that more, if he was a more ambiguous character, I think that it would have been a better movie, but wouldn't have gotten made. You're right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, we'll send John Dahl some notes. And we'll see.
Like, you have notes for your 19-year-old movie.
Yeah, go back in time and fix this shit. Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I do think that we need to end by saying our favorite lines from the movie. And you know my favorite line is... Am
I supposed to think of a different line besides your favorite line?
No, I mean, if you want to pull up the quote page and see if you can find a line that you like
I think we
more.
Should just end on our favorite line, and you can do it.
All right, so I think we're going to wrap this up. And we appreciate you all for listening, if you made it this far. And if you didn't, then...
We understand.
Yeah, like seriously, you gotta.
We are gonna Rusty Nail style vendetta until you get an apology.
Yeah,
we will run you into a tree.
Yeah, first of all, we're gonna Paul Walker style buy a truck, a tractor trailer with our MasterCard, our parents' MasterCard, and then we're gonna track you down, CB radio you. And then we'll pin you to a tree.
Just as a footnote, I know we're ending this, but I forgot to put it in there. They do say their dad is a plumber.
Really?
Yep. But they don't act that way. It's a misstep. I don't think they really, that might have been like the third, fourth iteration of writing it. But they certainly act like rich kids. But yes, they say their dad is a plumber.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. I didn't even catch that. I was going off on like how rich they are. Okay. But then again, that was a time when a plumber could buy a house in America and like live comfortable middle class life.
Sure.
So, our generation is so screwed. Anyway, thank you for listening. I realized that I didn't explain what my view about the supernatural element to this was. Basically, it's that the disembodied voice of Ted Levine is sort of haunting this tractor trailer representing the entire baby boomer generation, bringing their wrath against the Gen Xers. That was the idea. He's basically like the ghost of all the boomers. Like he's the spiritual embodiment of boomer vengeance, coming to sort of claim their stake against the Gen X slackers.
Sure.
But yeah, that's obviously not true. Okay. final words?
I think you should just do the quote.
All right, so let me get in here. I want to talk. No, wait, no, that's not it. He goes, I need to find candy cane.
If I abandon this project, I would be a man without dreams. It's not only my dreams. My belief is that all these dreams are yours as well. And the only distinction between me and you is that I can articulate them.